Hey there, my name is Anem Sayan, and welcome to another episode of... Today we're taking a look at Red Dead Revolver, a third-person shooter set in the Old West that was released on the PS2 and original Xbox in May of 2004, a game that didn't make the biggest impact when it first landed, but did help set up one of the most popular games ever with its spiritual successor. So I thought it would be perfect for this series, and honestly I've got nothing better to do with my time. Anyway, let's begin. I've got to say, coming into this game, I think I set myself up for a bit of a fall. When it comes to making videos in this series, I purposely avoid doing too much research on the game before I play it, especially if I've not played it before. I kind of like to go into the experience as fresh as possible, so that my opinion isn't influenced by the content and impression of others. The problem with this approach is that my impression of Red Dead Revolver for the last 18 years was that it was one of Rockstar's side projects that was perfectly fine and had potential, but wasn't really worth picking up. A textbook 7 out of 10 type of game that back in 2004 I just never got around to playing. However, with literally 30 seconds of research, I would have discovered that this game's development had a slightly more complicated story than that, which would have explained so much because, let me tell you, ooh, and might I add, oh wee, this is a rough game. The purpose of this series is to ask the question, does it hold up? But after 20 minutes of playing Red Dead Revolver, I found myself asking the question, well, did it ever? I should probably clarify what I mean when I say that the story of its development is a little complicated, so here's a quick recap of how things played out. So from what I've read, in 1999 a developer based in California named Angel Studios was approached by Capcom to handle the N64 port of Resident Evil 2. After they put that game together and had formed a bit of a partnership with Capcom, they were then approached again about an original new game called SWAT, and at some point during all of these discussions and early stages of production, it somehow became a Western-themed game. Anyway, Capcom went full steam ahead, gave Angel Studios a bunch of money in the year 2000 and said, go make us a third-person Western shooter. Then we jumped to about 2 years later, and development isn't going too great, and Red Dead Revolver is kind of cancelled, but not entirely. Then, 6 months after that, Take-Two, owner of Rockstar Games, acquires Angel Studios and renamed the company to Rockstar San Diego, and after having a look at all of the projects they had in the works, they decided to revive Red Dead Revolver, and it would eventually hit consoles roughly 18 months later in May of 2004. After close to 5 years of development, when players did get their hands on it, reviews were very mixed, getting everything from 6 to 9 out of 10, and in terms of sales and how much of a splash it made on the industry, well, let's just say we all know that the Red Dead series didn't really take off until Redemption. Just to be clear, the reason I said that I might have set myself up for a fall with this title isn't because I was expecting a slightly worse version of Red Dead Redemption, but more because I thought this was going to be a somewhat fun but shallow time that Rockstar decided to flesh out into something bigger and better because they saw the potential it had. After playing Revolver, I've got to be super honest, I'm glad that Redemption 1 and 2 exist, they are some of my favourite games of all time, but I have no idea what potential Rockstar saw here because this might be the biggest upgrade I've ever seen from one game to its sequel. So where to begin? I guess with the story and the setup for the game. Now, there isn't tons of story to dive into, but the short version of the story is as follows. It's 1860 in the Old West. You play as Red, who at the beginning of the game is just a kid, greeting his father who has just returned from finding a lot of gold in a nearby mountain, and about 30 seconds into celebrating back at home with his wife and child, his home is attacked by the Mexican army as word is spread of his recent discovery. They come in, they do a lot of shooting, and Red unfortunately ends up as an orphan, and just before escaping he shoots one of the big bad guy's arms off. Then we skip to about 12 years later, and now Red is a fully grown man and bounty hunter, and from here we pretty much follow Red as he goes from one bounty to the next, while also getting caught up in the troubles of the local townsfolk. There is a little bit more mystery to the death of his family and how all of that happened. I won't go into it to avoid spoiling it for anyone, but I wouldn't say it's anything worth getting excited over or invested in.
What the hell are you looking at? fill 'em full of lead.
Now that we've got that out of the way, let me tell you about the structure of the game, because it caught me a little off guard if I'm honest. I was expecting a sort of standard flow for an action title of this period, maybe 10 to 15 missions ranging from 15 to 30 minutes in length, but actually the game is broken down into a lot of very small pieces, which is a double-edged sword. Some missions can literally be finished in around 60 seconds, and some go on for up to 10 minutes, and the reason I say this is a double-edged sword is because when you break a game down into such small pieces, it means that even if you're not enjoying the current mission, you know it won't be long before it's over, but at the same time you feel like you're playing something that is unfinished. One of the best ways I can describe Red Dead Redemption is to say it feels like you're playing a game that had all of the bits in between the action set pieces cut out of it. Now, given the game's lengthy and troubled development, there's a good chance that this is exactly what happened, because when the studio was acquired, they may have decided to put out the game while also spending the least amount of time possible turning it into something that you could pass for a full game. On paper, the missions they throw at you sound great. Things like having a shootout on top of a moving train, or searching for bandits while working your way through a canyon, or even taking part in a 3-on-1 duel. All perfectly good ideas for missions in this sort of game, but they end up being wasted opportunities. The key problem here really is the game just does not control well at all, and just has a lot of weird quirks that spoil the experience, mostly related to the aiming and shooting. Not only does the aiming reticle not properly reflect where your shots will actually end up, meaning you have to aim slightly higher where you intend to hit someone, but also at the same time, when moving the camera, there's a small bit of delay when you stop moving the thumbstick and when the camera stops moving. So a lot of the times your reticle will be swinging all over the place as you try to find your next target. One of the other issues is that it technically has a cover system, but it is awkward because the animation of getting into and popping out of cover takes twice as long as it should, and it is also redundant because cover systems only really work if the enemies are also using cover themselves, but if they just run around like headless chickens or charge straight at you, then you may as well just be running around too, which is exactly what I did for the majority of my playthrough, and the only times I died were against some of the trickier bosses. Now, on top of the control issues, one of the big things that stuck out to me is that even after you overcome everything I just mentioned, taking down enemies doesn't even feel satisfying. Now, satisfying combat when it comes to shooters generally comes down to three things: the feel of the weapons through the controls and controller vibration, the sound of the weapons, and the animation of the enemies once they've been hit. Most top-tier shooters nail 2 or 3 of these elements, but Red Dead Revolver drops the ball on all of them. I haven't even mentioned the fact that sometimes the game clearly wants you to shoot enemies in specific places, but gives you no indication to this at all. I mean, look at this. Look at how many times I'm shooting this boss lady directly in the face, but for some reason shooting her hands does more damage. When I finally got to grips with the sway and wonky aiming of the weapons and started getting successive headshots one after the other, none of them brought me any real joy. It all felt limp, and none of the action had the impact that you want from a game like this. It is a real shame, to be honest, because there are a lot of aspects of this game that I like and that would be executed better in the next game. There's a good choice of different weapons with varying stats that you can unlock, and you can build your own loadout. Each mission you're graded on accuracy and time, and good performances lead to more unlocks and upgraded versions of those weapons. The Deadeye feature, which allows you to slow down time and mark your targets for a quick burst of shots, is good, but a little inconsistent. And the dueling mechanic, which is another feature that would return in Redemption, is also a great addition. For every good addition, however, it feels like there is also a confusing one to match it. The two most notable of these are the small town that you often return to in between missions, and the items you can purchase while there. When coming back to this little hub area, there are shops and buildings that you can enter, but the majority of items you can buy just unlock pages from Red's journal. So you might buy a poncho, spurs, a saloon, or a loaf of bread, but none of it impacts the game really. The town itself is just a really basic square that might as well well be some historic recreation from a theme park. In fact, almost all of the missions take place in a very small, contained area that are blocked by invisible walls. Another reason why I said earlier that it feels like they cut out all of the bits except the action set pieces. Normally with most games, I feel like they restrict your view so you can't see just how small the level actually is, and they try to maintain the illusion a little more, but with Red Dead Revolver, I feel like I'm seeing behind the curtain too often, as everything just outside of the area I'm currently standing in is just a flat, barren landscape with a pixelated skybox. Sadly, the visual issues don't end there either, because you can definitely tell that production started on this game in the year 2000. I should clarify at this point that the version I'm playing is the original Xbox version through the backwards compatibility feature on my Series X, and the games available through that feature are cleaned up a little, so you're probably seeing a sharper version than the original game. Design-wise, I don't actually have a problem with how it looks. It's clearly trying to go for a borderline cartoonish rundown style of the Old West. It's more from a technical perspective that it loses me. The main characters in the story obviously receive the most attention and care, but almost everything else made me wince a little. There's a lot of flat and fuzzy textures used throughout the game that make grass and sand look like wallpaper, a lot of rough looking effects when it comes to fire and explosions, and then we have the enemies, which honestly border on grotesque, because I don't know what happened to this brother's face, but I hope him and his family are doing well. In terms of animation, I've seen a lot worse and a lot better. Think GTA 3, except if it released 3 years too late. Actually, now I think about it, a lot about this game gives me early GTA vibes, especially watching the characters move around in the cutscenes that for some reason unnecessarily slaps on a vintage cinema film grain filter, only for it to be removed as soon as the cutscene ends. One of the few highlights for me was actually the soundtrack. A few missions in, I started to think, okay, this is pretty good, they did a great job with this music. But then, after a few more missions of listening, I realised that I'm almost positive that all of the tracks are simply just licensed from a classic Western movie, which would explain a lot, really. As for the voice acting, well, let's just say we go from okay stuff like this.
You did good, son, but you're out of luck. Take a look around. There ain't much here. I got nothing to offer you.
To stuff that sounds like it was done in one take with a randomer from the street, like this.
Why is the train speeding up? Something must have happened to the engineer!
None of it reaching high enough quality to draw you in, nor does it reach a low enough quality to be charming. So I'm not quite sure where to go from here. My intention with this video was not to turn it into a rant about all of the problems I have with Red Dead Revolver. My actual intention was to find all of the silver linings and come up with a list of reasons for why it is worth your time. The problem I have is that I would only recommend this game to you if you were someone like myself, someone who is so obsessed with this generation of games that you want to experience all of its hits and misses, or if you're someone who's such a huge fan of the Redemption games that you want to try it out and get a glimpse of some of the aspects of the design and mechanics that made it through into a much better game. Obviously, the purpose of this series is to ask, does it hold up? And if you've made it this far into the video, then you probably already know my answer to that question. Red Dead Revolver is a game that feels unpolished, unfinished, undercooked. I mean, you take your pick for whichever word you think suits best, but I think the biggest shame here is that even though it plays like a game with the boring bits cut out, the exciting bits that they left in are also kind of boring too. Okay, I'm done, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on Red Dead Revolver. Have you played it? Did you like it? Am I an uncultured swine that doesn't recognise great art when I see it? Whatever your opinion, I'd love to know. And if you like to see more content like this, then drop us a like and hit that sub button. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. I've been an Epsayan, you've been a wonderful audience, and I hope to see you next time.